Doesn't this feel a bit like this is your life, Letchworth? So, it is great to be here for my third time into this august society, and it is amazing to see aunts, nephews, cousins, neighbours, friends, school friends. Astonishing, quite amazing. I apologize in advance. I will be mentioning some names of people who were part of the Letchworth story. Please do not be insulted if I missed your name. I put that in now so I don't get lynched. Very quickly, I just want to tell you how this talk came about. There I was minding my own business, as I normally do, and I get an email from somebody in Letchworth who had found my name through this book. It's called The Vow, which is the story of my parents. And she wanted to know something about the Sassoon Library. The famous Sassoon Library in Letchworth. I told her what I knew. I gave her some information. And she thanked me and everything else. And then I sent her an email. I said, by the way, if there is a historical society in Letchworth, and if that society would be interested in a talk about the Jews of Letchworth, I'd be happy to oblige. So she writes back and she says, I am the secretary of... And thus was born my invitation this coming February to address the Letchworth Garden City Society on the Jews of Letchworth. Fast forward another couple of months, and Dr. Kenneth Collins, who is not with us this evening, asks me, would I once again come and talk to the society? And he said, what would you like to talk on? So I said, well, I'm in the middle of working on something new, which I'm about to deliver in Dublin. It's about Daniel Deronda, and how come George Eliot wrote the first Zionist novel 20 years before there was Zionism. He said, yeah, that sounds right. Anything else? So I gave him 2 or 3 of the other talks that I have been doing, and I'm, as an afterthought, I said, and I'm going to Letchworth? We're going to have Letchworth. And that's how this evening came about. It's a funny, funny world. A couple of months ago, I took my grandson Uri, who is now 13, for a day trip into the desert. That's what he wanted, and he nagged me, and boy does he know how to nag. So I took him into the desert for a day. And we were coming down the cable car from Masada. I got chatting to an American couple who were visiting. And as you do, I played Jewish geography. Where are you from? We're from Far Rockaway. I said, I've heard of Far Rockaway. Where are you from? I said, I'm from a little shtetl called Letchworth. Letchworth? She says, I've just read this week about this couple that kept the Letchworth community going on long past its sell-by date. I said, yeah, that's my parents. Quite astonishing. 46 years after the Letchworth Jewish community officially ceased to exist, its reach continues to extend across the world, and you are an example of this. Just before he died in 2015, my late father Eli, many of you will have known him, the last president of the Letchworth Hebrew congregation, posted a brief history of the community on the website of the Jewish Communities and Records. So my talk this evening draws partly on what he wrote, on the wealth of material that I gathered. The first edition was about 14, 15 years ago, and I update it every 2 or 3 years. This is the latest edition of The Vow. Material from other former residents of Letchworth, and of course my own memories. This evening I'm going to talk about the origins of the Letchworth Hebrew community, how my family got to live in Letchworth, and what it was like growing up in Letchworth. And again, apologies for any errors in terms of dates or names or places. In fact, any facts and figures. I'd be very happy to get your comments afterwards. So, what and where is Letchworth for the uninitiated? In 1898, Ebenezer Howard wrote a book called Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform. And this was a revolutionary town planning concept where people would live harmoniously with nature. And in 1903, these ideas saw their first implementation in Letchworth, the first garden city. Some of you may have also heard of Welwyn Garden City, a continuation of the same plan, and Hampstead Garden Suburb was the third of the experiments following Ebenezer Howard's ideas. This North Hertfordshire experiment became a mecca for cranks. Cockney workers on their Sundays off travelled by train from King's Cross to gawp at Letchworth's implausible collection of weavers, potters, yoga fetishists, birth control fanatics, smock-wearing Esperanto speakers, and theosophists. John Betjeman, in his poems Group Life, Letchworth, and Huxley Hall, painted Letchworth people as earnest health freaks. George Orwell, who lived near Letchworth, was a little less, listen, this is what he said. He says, Letchworth attracted every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature cure quack, pacifist, and feminist in England. So if Letchworth's demographic profile was odd before 1939, you can imagine what happened when 500 Orthodox Jews descended on the town in 1939 and 1940. By the mid-30s, a handful of Jews were already living in Letchworth. Frederick Kirsch arrived from Germany in 1936 to run the Kerr Gloves factory in nearby Hitchin. And those of you from Letchworth, of course, be very familiar with the Kirsches. And I'm still in contact with one of his sons, Stephen, whose wife Janet was my dad's tennis partner for many, many years, and with Stephen's 4 children. And this evening we have a lady here who was very friendly with Peter Kirsch's wife. Was that at school already?
No, actually at art school.
At art school. So another connection.
Yes.
So the people of Letchworth may have been cranks, but they were enlightened cranks. They invited Frederick to join the local golf club. Now, as you know, joining a golf club in the 1930s in England, this was a chiddush. This was not something that happened in every town. Another family already well established in Letchworth before 1939 were, of course, the Sassoons. Welcome. Sassoon, joy. Most of the Sassoons you are familiar with. Vidal Sassoon of the hair salon fame, Sir Victor Sassoon of the horse racing fame, and Siegfried Sassoon, the war poet, belong to the same illustrious family that originally came from Baghdad. I will return to the Sassoons a little later. If you draw an arc of about 30 to 50 miles outside North London, complete circle round North London, you will identify some 20 pop-up communities where Jews fleeing from the Luftwaffe bombing raids sought to settle. Amersham, Beaconsfield, Bedford and Berkhamsted, Chesham, Dorking, Epsom and Guildford, Hemel Hempstead, Hitchin, High Wycombe and Maidenhead, Slough, St Albans and Staines, Welwyn Garden City, Woking and Worthing, and of course Letchworth. And Letchworth was unique because it was almost exclusively Orthodox, largely due to astonishing timing. Just as the war broke out, property developer Abba Bornstein, the head of British Mizrahi, who later lived just down the road here. Was it Shalom Aleichem Street he lived? Number 5, thank you. Yes, you would know, yes. Completed the A. Bornstein estate in Letchworth, and hundreds of Orthodox Jewish families gravitated towards Hallmead, Mulway and Monklands. This tiny enclave boasted a communal infrastructure typical of much larger communities. Several synagogues, by which I mean Stieblach mainly, in private homes, dozens of rabbis, teachers, shochtim, moalim, a kosher butcher, grocery store, a mikveh, and several cheder. Business people and professionals continued to commute by train throughout World War II to their offices, shops and warehouses in London. And every morning on what was called the milk train at 6 o'clock from Letchworth, there were several minyanim on the train. Other prominent members of the community included Abba Bornstein's two of his brothers, Shlomo and Moshe, who made uniforms in nearby Weston. Rabbi Horowitz, the rabbi of the community and head of World Aguda, was the rabbi who tried unsuccessfully to get the Pope to intervene in the Holocaust. And my father, throughout his life, was incensed at the response that he got from the Vatican. Words to the effect was the words that, well, look, what do you want? The Jews rejected Christianity, so what do you want? Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, the author of Michtav Eliyahu, and Rabbi Solomon Sassoon's personal tutor. Diana Brumsky, the head of the London Best Inn. Dr. Isidore Epstein, principal of Jews College. Rabbi Elia Lapian, grandfather of my cousins, the leader of the Muslim movement, who later founded Kfar Hasidim Yeshiva. Rabbi Chanoch Ehrentreu, he went to Letchworth Grammar School, I think, later head of United Synagogue. The secretary of the Letchworth Hebrew congregation was Rabbi Heinemann. Sammy Fisher, later Lord Fisher of Camden, who later was chairman of the governing board of the World Jewish Congress. The Lunzer, Freumann, Kornbluth, Cohen and Gottschalk families. The Grudzinski family, the famous Jewish bakers. And amazingly, the founder, Abraham, died in Letchworth in 1918. What he was doing in Letchworth in 1918, the Lord only knows. No idea. The Stern and Greenbaum families, the kosher butchers in the Wind, the Schwab family, and many, many more. And again, my apologies if I've forgotten critical names. Several Jews were billeted with non-Jews in Letchworth, as this reminiscence shows. We had Mr. and Mrs. Hackenbroch from London compulsorily billeted on us. They were a pleasant Orthodox Jewish couple, both practicing dentists, refugees from Germany. They travelled to London daily. We were bemused that they were not allowed to do anything on their Sabbath, could not touch money or even switch lights on or off. Another wartime reminiscence. When I first started at Westbury School, Jewish children were taught in the mornings and Gentiles in the afternoons, and we would change over each week. The rabbis were very much in evidence about the town. One, I remember, was from the rich Jewish family, the Sassoons. One other such gentleman rejoiced under the name of Rabbi Fartwanger, a name which us children took great amusement in repeating. The reference, of course, was to Rav Usher Feuchtwanger, later Letchworth's communal rabbi. Because he was German-born, the British, in their wisdom, shipped him off to Australia in 1940 aboard the notorious internment ship Dunera, which carried both Jews and Nazis. The anti-Semitic British soldiers treated the Nazis with great courtesy, but confiscated valuables from the Jewish internees and threw overboard their personal belongings, including talitot, tefillin, passports, and documents. A British officer was later court-martialed and demoted. In his own way, the ultra-Orthodox Rabbi Feuchtwanger, was very forward-looking. In 1963, he informed my mother that after her first 3 sons had celebrated their bar mitzvahs, it was only right that her daughter, next in line, should have a bat mitzvah, which set a precedent for Orthodox bat mitzvahs long before they became popular in London. So how did my family discover Letchworth of the Cranks? When my mother, Eva Becker, her parents and her sister Marion arrived in London from Germany in 1938, they joined the community of Dr. Rabbi Solomon Schonfeld, the maverick rabbi and unsung Holocaust hero who single-handedly rescued thousands of Jews from Europe before and after the war and has been shoddily treated by historians. Schonfeld created the fictitious Chief Rabbi's Religious Emergency Council. Now, you've all heard of this council, but I don't know how many of you know that it never existed. It existed in Rabbi Schonfeld's mind. He created note paper, and only when he married the chief rabbi's daughter did the chief rabbi actually give his endorsement to this emergency council. In the first week of September 1939, 500 mostly German refugees from Rabbi Schonfeld's Jewish secondary school were evacuated to Shefford, which is very close to Letchworth. Among the evacuees were the Becker sisters, my mum and Aunt Marion, who were billeted in Stotfold. Again, these are little villages and towns very close to Letchworth. When the air raids in London intensified, their parents joined them in Stotfold. And it was in Stotfold that they first heard of this Jewish community in Letchworth, and one Shabbat they walked there to investigate. They liked what they saw and rented an upstairs flatlet in the Aborn estate from Abba Bornstein. When they arrived in Letchworth, they discovered that they actually knew quite a few people in the Kehillah. Rabbi Horowitz came from Frankfurt. Rabbi Sassoon was married to a Benjamin, and my mum knew the Benjamins from school. And there were quite a few, and the Lunzers my mother's parents knew from. So there was a lot of. It wasn't a total new Kehillah for them. When my mum became a land girl, she left Letchworth to do her service on one of the dozen Hachshara kibbutzim all over Britain. The British Ministry of Agriculture had no objection if these mainly refugee youngsters wanted to play at being kibbutzniks, so long as they fulfilled their land work duties. And it was on the tiny Orthodox Hardmead kibbutz in Buckinghamshire that Eva met Ellie, who had left Berlin as a 15-year-old in May 1939 with a kinder transport and attended Whittingham Farm School on Lord Balfour's Scottish estate. My father joined the British Army in early 44, and Rabbi Broch from Letchworth officiated at their wedding in Hardmead in December 1944. Under the chuppah, my parents made a vow. That's why I called this book The Vow. They would rebuild the Fachler tribe that by then my dad suspected had been wiped out by the Nazis. Unfortunately, my dad's fears proved correct, and he lost his parents, grandparents, and dozens of uncles, aunts, and cousins. When I first published the first edition of The Vow, my parents had gone a long way to fulfilling their vow. At the time, 7 children, 26 grandchildren, and 25 great-grandchildren. Today, the number of great-grandchildren has quadrupled, and they are very, very close to the 100 mark. In fact, one of the latest Nin, the latest great-grandchild, had a Brit this morning in Ra'anana and was called after my father. When my mum was expecting her first child, that's me, in 1945, my parents and grandparents and my both aunts, moved into 79 Hallmead, just up the road from the shul at number 40. My chalutz-minded father has the distinction of being twice chucked out of the shul at number 40 Hallmead by Shlomo Bornstein. The first time when he turned up in shorts, and the second time when he tried to turn up in open sandals. I was born in January 1946 and my brother David was born in 1947. Sadly, David died when he was 5. Marcus Mordechai, born in 1949, became a rabbi and psychotherapist, and sadly he died in 2010. Chaim Harry, born in 1950, works for Mainei HaYeshua Hospital in Bnei Brak. My only sister Melanie, born in 1954, is a teacher in London. Meir Malcolm, born in 1958, works in education here in Jerusalem. And my youngest brother Yossi, my notorious youngest brother Yossi, born in 1967, just 8 months before my oldest son Ashi, works in education in London. And my parents, being my parents, fostered 7-year-old Susie until she was 15. Let me give you a taste of what it was like growing up in Letchworth. I went to Cheder when I was 3 and could read and write Hebrew before I went to school. Although I could read and write English by the time I attended Wilbury Infants, a curious thing happened to my English accent that none of my Letchworth-raised younger siblings inherited, as they are very happy to attest. Up to age 5, every single significant adult that I knew, my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, parents' friends, all spoke English with an accent. German, French, Yiddish, Czech, Hungarian, Russian, Arabic, Israeli. So by the time I went to school, I had internalized a continental twang that has bedeviled me for 65 years. Everywhere I go in the world, people say, "Where are you from?" So I say, "Guess." South Africa? Sweden? Moshe Bornstein was the father of my oldest friend Stella. He was also my alarm clock. As his big black Humber passed my home every morning at 7 a.m. on its way to Shacharit, Moshe would beep twice. Within 7 minutes, I was in the synagogue. And the reason why it wasn't my dad who woke me every morning is that he had left for work at least an hour earlier. After shul, I returned home for breakfast, then I walked to school. I always came home for lunch because, of course, the school dinners were not kosher. Only once in my life did I regret having to keep kosher. It was the school Christmas party, and every kid had to bring some jelly. Now, at the time, the only kosher jelly on the market was Schoen's, long before Snowcrest. Schoen's kosher jelly. And so it was Schoen's finest that I took with me to school. On display at the school was the most magnificent range of brightly coloured, solid-looking, wobbly jelly. And all I could muster was my sad, insipid, non-wobbly excuse for jelly, courtesy of Schoen's. Kosher, of course, was a theme in our family. I used to accompany my mum when I was very young to a nearby farm where she supervised the milking so that the Jewish families could have shoymed kosher milk. My dad's first job after being demobbed was with Stern and Greenbaum, the kosher butcher in Letchworth. And in the early, we've got some customers here, I gather, from far-flung places who were later customers of my dad's shop in the early 50s, he started Luton Kosher Foods, selling meat, poultry, and kosher grocery products. His partner was Oscar Ossie Pressburger, whose wife Giza had been Enid Blyton's housekeeper during the war. Some of you may know the book called The Rabbi in the Green Jacket. No? Oh, it's a pity, because it's a very interesting book about the Jews of Buckinghamshire during the war. And there's a whole section there on the Pressburgers, and the authors, a mother and daughter, had collected a huge amount of information for their book. Someone suggested they contacted me, and I said, of course, you knew about the kibbutzim in Buckinghamshire during the war. What? And so there's a nice long section that I gave them from the vow about the kibbutzim. Anyway, it's a book that's worth reading. So I have vivid memories of spending every Pesach vacation in the shop with my younger siblings, preparing the Passover orders from my dad's customers. At the time I said to my dad, you do so much business on Pesach. This must be lucrative. He looks at me, and did he laugh? He says, I lose on this. There's no way I can make a profit, but my customers have to eat kosher. That was my dad. At the age of 10, I got the lucrative job of supervising the kosher for Passover margarine in Letchworth's vegetarian Golden Block factory. You remember that? Yeah. I stamped each box of margarine as it came off the production line. Back to my daily schedule. From the age of 7, I would go straight from school in the afternoon to the synagogue, number 40 Hall Mead, where I studied with a series of private tutors who were students in the tiny yeshiva that had relocated from Staines. I remember a mighty snowball fight between the yeshiva boys and the local yokels. For a while, my mum was the yeshiva's cook. As an Orthodox child, I kept my school cap on all day at school. One day, on my own initiative, I asked Mr. Smith, of course Mr. Smith, the headmaster, whether I could wear my yarmulke at school. Of course, he said, just bring a note from your parents. My astonished parents gave their permission, and for the next 20 years, any Jewish boy in Letchworth could wear a yarmulke in school. One Sunday, on my way to visit my friend Suzanne Pressburger, I must have been about 8, I passed Mr. Smith leaning on his back gate. Jacob, he said. I was Jacob at Wilbury, I was Yanky at home. I've been meaning to ask you, do you know what happened to the original 5 books of Moses? A perfectly reasonable question, except that I didn't know what on earth he was talking about. I'd never heard the Torah referred to as the 5 books of Moses, so not wanting to display my ignorance, I gave what I thought was a perfectly reasonable answer. Well, sir, we've got 3 of them in our synagogue. I don't know where the other 2 are. He must have had a right old laugh. After I passed my 11 plus, I got a scholarship to Carmel College, the Jewish boarding school founded by Rabbi Koppel-Rosen, where... Oh, Robin's not here tonight. Oh, Robin's here. Hi, Robin. Where Robin's uncle was the deputy principal. A few weeks ago, I attended a very moving Carmel reunion in London where I met several people I hadn't seen for almost 50 years, and it was very nice because we did a communal Kaddish for the boys who were no longer with us. And some of them remembered that my dad had supplied the school with meat. Happily, their memories were good ones. By the way, here is a trivial pursuit question. I know that you all know that the Beatles recorded their music in the iconic Abbey Road studios. I know you know that. Here's the question. Who recorded there first? The Beatles or Yanky Fachler? In 1957, the Carmel College Choir, of which I was a member, recorded an LP. And some of you may need to ask older people here what an LP is. And I only just discovered that the studio where we recorded our record was none other than the Abbey Road studio. So the Beatles obviously heard about our record. Rabbi Feuchtwanger's brother-in-law, Rabbi Solomon Sassoon, was an original thinker who spoke several languages, including fluent Yiddish, and made original contributions to linguistic analysis, philosophy, physiology, and biblical criticism. He liked to drive fast cars and motorbikes. Yes, I can see recognition in the corner there. And I often clung on for dear life as we raced through the streets of Letchworth, and of course they hadn't invented crash helmets yet. Rabbi Sassoon was the only man ever to be invited to become the combined Ashkenazi and Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel. Wisely, he refused, and he explained to me he didn't want to be swallowed up in politics and bureaucracy, and wasn't he right? In 1955, at the height of the anti-Shechita agitation in Britain, Rabbi Sassoon wrote and self-published a critical study of electrical stunning and the Jewish method of slaughter, Shechita. And he sent a copy to every single member of parliament, and I think to every county councillor as well. The booklet was reprinted 8 times between 1955 and 1956, and the fact is, the agitation died down. When I was about 15, Rabbi Sassoon enlightened me as to what has been wrong with Ashkenazi rabbis for the previous 200 years. I said, what? He said, they're far too rigid, and all they have done is alienate generations of youngsters. With Sephardi rabbis, he explained, it's different. Our younger generations maintain a respect for their rabbis even if they are not religious. For example, last week, he said to me, 2 brothers from my Sephardi community in London came to ask me for my blessing for their new business venture. Who were they? I asked. Morris and Charles Saatchi, if I can pronounce it properly. We're talking, of course, about the Saatchi brothers who founded Saatchi and Saatchi Advertising Agency. And they'd come down to Letchworth to get a bracha. Talking about Sephardim and Ashkenazim, Rabbi Sassoon's son Chaki, Rabbi Isaac Sassoon, wrote the following. In Letchworth we had an eruv around our yard, and we asked our teacher, Chacham Yosef Duri, alav shalom, a wise, learned and reliable person. By the way, Chacham Duri helped me with my the mitzvah preparation. If we could ride our bicycles within the eruv on Shabbat. He told us that it is permitted, provided we removed the horn and the batteries for the light before Shabbat. My father, this is Chaki still talking, alav shalom, agreed with him, but was concerned with the feelings of the Ashkenazi neighbors who might not understand. So we refrained from riding on Shabbat. Rabbi Sassoon was the custodian of his father David's Judaica collection, the world's greatest private collection of 1,000 years' worth of priceless Sifrei Torah, books, illuminated manuscripts, Geniza fragments, Machzorim, Haggadot, Ktubot, and unpublished writings. When Rabbi Sassoon wrote a book on the Baghdad Jews, the history of the Baghdad Jews, based on his father's manuscripts, he asked my grandmother, Melanie Becker, to help him decipher the old scripts, and she was posthumously thanked in the foreword when the book was published. One day, Rabbi Sassoon says, I want to show you something. He took me to a side room that I never knew existed, opened a cupboard, and there is a smallish size, Sephardi style, what I thought was a Sefer Torah. You know, they stand round, click. So he opened it up, and immediately I saw this is not a Sefer Torah. It didn't have cursive writing. And I'm looking at it, and it's beautifully written, like impeccable, graphically, just very, very clear, and I understand it. I said, what is this? He says, it's one of the works of the Rambam. Wow, I said, it's so fabulous. He said, no, you don't understand. The Rambam wrote this with his own hand. And this particular, I can't remember which sefer it was, is now, if I'm not mistaken, in the National Library. Am I right? Yes. The Sassoon household made a lasting impression on everyone who experienced it up front. Whether it was mixing with the 3 generations of black Jews from Cochin, watching how Rabbi Sassoon's mother Selina was treated like royalty, or being told to stand up when my father entered the room, we learned valuable life lessons. Around the time I went to Carmel, my family moved into a larger home in Sollershot East, just down the road from the Sassoons, near the vicarage where Sir Lawrence Olivier lived when his father was the clergyman there. Just up the road was Sollershot Circus, which has the distinction of being Britain's very first roundabout, built in 1909. Whether we should applaud that or curse it, I think the jury is still out. The Sassoon's home now became our synagogue. I soon became adept at reading the Torah and leading the services in the Baghdadi style. Don't have much opportunity in Ireland to do that. Our move coincided with an influx every Shabbat of Jewish students from Cambridge University, many of whom were house guests of ours and or of the Sassoons. One of those who came for the intellectual stimulation provided by the Sassoon household and the culinary and chill-out stimulation provided by the Fachlers was a young Jonathan Sachs, later the Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Other frequent visitors included Aviva Gottlieb, now the internationally renowned biblical scholar, Dr. Aviva Zornberg, students who went on to become illustrious rabbis, doctors and communal leaders, including Michael Wieselberg, Chaim Perlman, Jeremy Rosen, Elliot Berry, and many, many others. Letchworth also solved the problem encountered by Orthodox students, because in Cambridge, the exams were on a Shabbat, and if it fell on a Chag, they were on the Chag, and they were not movable. The university authorities authorized Rabbi Sassoon and Furtwanger to act as invigilators. Jewish students would remain incommunicado over Shabbat and took their exams on Sunday. And we never heard of any problems, so it looks like it worked for many, many years. Another steady source of Jewish visitors was St. Christopher's, the vegetarian school in Letchworth, where John Cleese is a governor, and we have an ex-pupil here this evening. I didn't know you were coming when I wrote that. Several of the Jewish pupils who boarded there from Israel, Britain, and elsewhere have remained firm friends ever since. The lengths to which my family went when they heard rumors that a Jew was living somewhere in the area is expressed in the following story. My dad heard that a Jewish doctor was working in Hitchin, in the Lister Hospital. And he sent messages, tried to find him, Gornish, nothing worked. One Motzei Shabbos in the winter, my dad, I think, maybe took my brother Chaim's hand and scratched it with his finger. Said, we got to go to hospital. And he schlepped Chaim to Lister Hospital and says, we need to see a doctor. My son got badly scratched. And out comes Dr. Sidney Bagel. Ah, says my dad, gotcha. And Sidney became he became a fixture for years and years in Letchworth. So that's what my dad would get up to if somebody was eluding him. And you're very welcome, Liz. By my bar mitzvah in 1959, only a rump of about 20 Jewish families remained in Letchworth. The Sassoons, the Feuchtwangers, the Fachlers, the Shishas, the Kirschs, the Pollocks, the Wangers, the Jaffes, the Abrams, the Wards, the Pressburgers, and my parents' best friends, Bernard and Marion Roth. In the late 1960s, Labour Party activist Bernard Roth brought Shirley Williams, still a Labour MP at the time, to a Kiddush one Shabbat in my parents' home, and I can still remember loudly remonstrating with her about Britain's massive arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So what's new? Haifa-based Karen Roth, who is with us this evening, whose wedding to Aaron Aini was officiated by Rabbi Sassoon, is the glue for the global Letchworth Jewish community, and is responsible for many of the people who are here this evening. The departure of the Sassoon household in the late 1960s spelled the beginning of the end for the Letchworth Jewish community. My parents hung on for a couple more years, but once it was no longer possible to guarantee a minyan, they left for London in 1971. The Roths and a handful of other Jews remained in Letchworth into the 70s, 80s and 90s. This evening I've traced the origins of the Letchworth Jewish community, how my family came to live there, and what it was like growing up. It says a lot about this cross-section of Jews, from English-born to continental to Eastern, from highly Orthodox to highly unorthodox, that they were able to create such a tightly knit and cohesive community between 1945 and 1971. People with Letchworth connections ended up in Scotland, England, Ireland, Israel, the USA, Canada, South Africa, France, Germany, Gibraltar, Belgium, Australia, and probably many other places that I haven't mentioned. I want to thank you all for this, my third opportunity to address this society. People still think it's very funny that this is the Jewish Historical Society of England Israel branch. I've had the privilege of addressing many of the branches where they should be in Britain, and I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.